Trevor is a software engineer at Breeze Airways. He lives in Utah County with his wife and children. And with that, let's welcome Trevor.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here. I forgot what I wrote in that bio, so that was a surprise for me too. Short and sweet. This is Look Legit Online, a guide for software engineers. Really excited to present this. Before we start, there is going to be sort of a code along session at the end. If you don't have accounts for these platforms and you want to follow along, this is the way to do it. Probably most people are familiar with GitHub, but if you have a GitHub account or create a GitHub account, you can use that to sign into Netlify and Replit. So we'll be forking a repo, and then we'll host it on Netlify, and we'll edit some code on Replit, and that way we can avoid any issues with different node versions and NPM versions, and we'll kind of take some notes from the earlier presentation on using remote code editor there. So a couple other things to note. I have a blog post that I already wrote with slides for this presentation. If you scan the QR code, that'll open up those notes for you, which has links to all the things that I'm going to go through. On the bottom right, hi, Trevor here. That's my handle on Twitter. If you want to connect, I'd love to do that. And if you have any questions, you can use that to message me. Or if you go to blog.trevorlane.dev, that's where a lot of the writing that I've done is. And you can find the notes for the presentation there as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So a little about me. I work as a software engineer at Breeze Airways, which was just mentioned. So we launched earlier this year, mostly flying on the East Coast, but we're headquartered here in Salt Lake City. So we are looking for JavaScript developers and Ruby developers. So if that seems interesting, working for an airline, kind of disrupting that industry, connect with me or come talk to me, and we could get a referral. I studied computer science at BYU, just graduated last year. While at BYU, I was the president of the dev club for a couple years, and then I live with my wife and children in Utah County. The majority of what I'm going to share during this talk is things that I've learned while I was president of the dev club at BYU. While there, I worked with a lot of students, prepping them for STEM fairs and technical interviews. And so I kind of learned what does and doesn't work when it comes to prepping for those sort of things. And that's where the majority of this content comes from. And here's what I'm going to talk about. So why look legit online? What does that mean? Kind of a catchy title. I'll get into that in a little bit more depth and explain what it means. I'm going to talk about 3 different ways to do it. And then the code along portion, we're going to write and deploy a blog in a few minutes. I wrote a starter template using React Next.js. It's styled with Tailwind CSS. And then we use GitHub Gist in a markdown format to host those blog posts, and those get imported into the template. And then we'll use Netlify to deploy it. So if you don't have an online presence, if all of this is new to you and you want to get one, we're going to do that in a few minutes towards the end of this talk. So why look legit online? So while I was helping students prepare for interviews and while interviewing myself, I came to the realization that decision makers, hiring managers, people who are doing technical interviews, they're trying to answer 2 questions during the entire interview process. Question number 1, can this person do the job? So this is more of the technical. Can they write the code? Do they know the technologies, et cetera, et cetera? You've probably encountered some technical assessments, right? Those are attempts to try to answer this question, see what your skill set really is. And the second question, can I stand to work with this person for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week during the work week? And it's actually interesting if you ask people, which of these 2 questions matters most, the skill set, or the sort of culture/human side to it. Everyone has different answers, but you might be surprised, on how many people disagree with you, depending on which side you take. So I think that both are equally important. The thing is that these questions are hard to answer confidently, and that's kind of why the hiring process for software engineering positions It's long, it's lengthy, it's difficult. It's hard to find good, solid answers. And hiring managers or people making these decisions, they're on the hook for the candidates that they come back and that they endorse and that they hire, right? It's much less expensive, much less problematic to pass on a good hire than it is to hire someone who turns out to, not be what you thought they were, right? And again, just to restate, you've probably seen signs of, hiring managers having trouble finding answers to these questions. And one manifestation of that is just that the interviewing process has tended to become more difficult as time goes on. And some of this is anecdotal, but you've probably, seen these signs, you've heard of some of these things. So we've heard about, difficulty of interviews increasing. You may hear about, students feeling the need to grind LeetCode code, right? If you're not doing 100 hard problems on LeetCode code every month, you're not going to be ready for the interview. Companies are giving take-home assignments that are more and more difficult. I've heard of some companies asking candidates to, build out a whole feature, to prove that they're qualified for a job. We've seen prolonged rounds of interviewing. Some companies do 2 or 3, something reasonable. Some companies do 6 or more, or maybe, 2 or 3 full days of interviewing. And then some companies are even turning to AI video assessment. Fortunately, this isn't everybody, but you've probably encountered a mix of some of these signs. And again, these are all signals that it's hard to answer those 2 questions, and these are attempts for hiring managers to find answers and to be confident about those answers. So as job candidates, as interviewers, how do we solve that problem? How do we make it easier for hiring managers to come up with answers to those questions and to be confident about their answers? My solution, look legit online. What does that really mean, though? So answering these questions, posting the answers online, and answering them frequently, right? And you can imagine this probably can take shape in a number of different ways. I have some suggestions on how to do it. I'm going to go over 3 of them. But at the end of the day, the goal here for an interviewer or a job candidate is really this message. Talk about what you're doing, talk about what you're learning, talk about how you're growing, put it online, somewhere, anywhere, and do it somewhat frequently, daily maybe, in some instances, weekly, monthly, yearly, etc. Talk about what you're doing and post it online. So the 3 ways that I've learned that were pretty effective to do this. It's LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way. A lot of recruiters are on LinkedIn, a personal website, and a blog. So about LinkedIn, we're going to have a presentation on crafting a LinkedIn profile after my presentation, so I won't say too much about that. So let's talk about websites for a little bit. From what I've seen, websites are a great place to show, long-term projects. These can be projects that you're working on, nights and weekends after your day job. These can be bigger projects that you've done, maybe as part of a boot camp or part of, an undergrad or a grad program at a university, more of a traditional approach. But in general, these would be, bigger, more long-term, more robust projects, not, code snippets or little things here and there that you're just kind of tinkering with. You'd preferably like these to be, more well-rounded. And then as much information as you can connect, visitors to other work that you've done, whether it's, your resume, source code for different repositories, GitHub, Gitbucket, whatever you use for that. Connect it back to your LinkedIn, where you can show positions that you've had, et cetera, your educational background, and then, ways for people to get in contact with you, whether it's Twitter handles, LinkedIn, or your email. Here's a couple of examples of websites. So these don't have to be complex to work. For those of you who were at the Kent Dodd's presentation, he talked about his new website that he just released. I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before. If you've gone to the website, it's kind of crazy. He has a lot of features on there. It's really cool. A lot of really cool animations. I think several people put in a lot of hours working on it. On the other hand, here's an example of another website that I visit frequently. I just happen to think it's cool. This is Julian Digital. It's just someone I found on Twitter who He kind of writes about quantifying his life and just talks about stuff that he's doing during the week, books that he's reading, what he's learning about. And so you can kind of see the more complex example and the more simple example, but they both allow the website owners, these developers, to talk about what they're doing and post it online frequently. Here's another example. So Connor Lindsay, he just spoke to us about Grafana. I went and looked up his website and stole and put it in here. Again, not too complicated, but well designed, well thought out. Looks nice, looks presentable. And then my website, something that I have up, same thing, right? Looks okay, but more importantly, it's a place for me to post things, post links, talk about what I'm working on, and then I'm able to update that. So let's talk about blogs a little bit. I think that websites and blogs, those can be used sort of interchangeably. You don't necessarily need to have both, right? One might get the job done. From what I've seen, again, blogs, like websites, can be more simple or more complex. But I would say that these are probably more frequently updated than a website. Instead of posting about whole projects or a link to a project, you might post about updates that you're making to a project that you've worked on over the course of several months or a few years. Again, another place to show what you're learning, how you're growing. And I think really a blog is a place for you to sort of get into the weeds, talk about the details of whatever you're nerding out on, like whatever your hobby is. Get into more detail there than you might on a website or something more professional like LinkedIn. A couple of examples of blogs. So again, Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, founder of ViaWeb, right? Pretty famous in terms of startup culture. One of the most visited blogs probably on the internet, literally just a list of links to some HTML, gets the job done, allows him to talk about ideas that he has and update it frequently. On the right, another JavaScript educator that's pretty famous, Wes Boss. You can just see from the screenshot here, he's probably put in a little bit more effort in terms of style and content on the website. Again, they both get the job done. They both allow the developers or the owners of the website to talk about what they're learning, new ideas that they're having, and they can update them as much as they want. So again, all of this goes back to kind of the principle of providing answers to these questions, right? So when you talk about what you're working on, whether it's at your job or things that you're doing on the side, you're overloading, essentially, that decision maker who's asking this question, can this person do the job? You're overloading them with information in terms of the things that you're working on, what you're doing. So if they have questions about, what technologies can this person use, how do they solve problems, all of the questions that you can imagine or that you've been asked in job interviews, when you write about what you're doing, you're able to provide answers for those questions beforehand, and you're able to do it in such a way that that decision maker is confident about where you are, what your skill set is. And as far as being able to stand, working with you, the more information that somebody has about you as a person, if you're on a blog talking about your hobbies, those things make you more relatable. And it's possible if you blog about how much of a dog lover you are and how much you hate cats, and then you interview with someone who's a cat lover and they hate dogs, maybe you miss out on that job opportunity. Probably wouldn't be a good fit at the end of the day. But it allows people to get to know who you really are, as opposed to, in a few 45 or 30-minute interviews, tell me about yourself, and then you try to come up with, the best possible answer. But ultimately, you aren't able to provide as complete a picture about your interests, who you are as a person. And so I feel that this is a much better way for you to do that. And again, it allows that hiring decision maker to more confidently know, who they're hiring. So sort of feedback I get when talking about this, like, that's great having a blog, but what to write about, right? It's pretty easy if you start thinking about it. First step, talk about the problems that you're solving. All of us who work with technology, work as developers, that's our job. We're solving problems on a daily basis. If you feel that, maybe you don't love your job and maybe you do things that you shouldn't have to do, what problems do you wish you were solving? What work do you wish you were doing? Why do you wish you were doing it? What's the hardest problem you've solved? What surprised you lately? What's been different than what you expected? Have you had a terrible surprise at work? You know, were you in DevOps at Facebook and you went to work and suddenly the whole website's down and you have to use an angle grinder to get into the server room? Was that a surprise or did you expect that? What good surprises have you had? What things have been easier than you expected? Maybe it's a decision you made in the past that because of that, you know, your job today is easier. And what did you learn, right? So ultimately just talking about the things you're doing, the things that are surprising, that are different, problems that you're solving, and just how you're growing and learning as a developer, you know, or whatever you're doing at work, really. So that is why look legit online, what that actually means, 3 ways to do it. And so now I'm going to get into writing and deploying this starter template. Should take about maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I think we're still okay on time. So this is something that I built for sort of beginning developers during my undergrad, so people could just quickly get something, have a presence online. And so it's meant to be spun up really quickly, so if you want to follow along, it's kind of built for that. But if not, the notes are online. If you want to come back and use this later, you're welcome to do that. So yeah, with that said, I'll get started and we'll start deploying, we'll start deploying this blog. So as I mentioned, the blog is hosted, the posts are hosted on GitHub using Gist, which is essentially a platform for code snippets. Before I do that, though, I'm just going to go over to, this is the blog post that's linked to in the QR code. So I'm just going to go over here and get the repository, and then I'm just going to fork this. That'll take a second. Looks like we're done there. And so now that that's done, I'm just going to go ahead and create a couple of GIFs to set this up. And a lot of this code is in the blog post. So the way that the posts are imported, I have a GIF that sort of works as a list of the blog posts. And so this is the first GIF that we'll create. So I'll just use that name, gistlist.json, and I'll create a new public GIF. And hit that again. Okay. And then I'm going to copy this. This is the ID for this gist, or gist. I think it's a soft G. And then I will go ahead. Actually, I'll just open a new tab and just kind of stow that there. And then I'll do another gist really quick. So I'll just copy this. Again, this is all in the notes for this presentation. And I'll just paste it there. Replace that with 3 dashes, and then add 3 dashes here. Just the formatting for the markdown required me to do that. And I'll create this public gist.
Can you zoom in?
Yeah, sorry, it's I can go through that too. So just all I did was this plus on the top right, hit that, just paste that. And then these dashes up here is what I'm replacing. And then right under there. So this is sort of meta information about the blog post. And again, this is just a template that I came up with to get a first blog post up. You can see some of the information here that you can update. So right here, I'll just go ahead and add my name. Already got a title, what I learned at Utah.js 2021, a date, image, and yeah, we'll hit create on that. So once I have this, right, this is the GIST ID. I'm going to go back to my, let's refresh this. Let's see here. I'm going to go back to my list, and then I'm just going to click edit, and I'm going to add the ID here, and then I've already got a name, which I'll just edit this really quick. Yeah, sorry, first post, right? So we've just got a name and an ID, so just an object here that's being stored as some JSON. And then I will update this. So we've created 2 GISTs. One of them is just a list of all the posts, and then the other one is a first post, right? We took the ID from the first one, and then we entered that into, we took the ID from the first post, and then we entered that into this list of posts. So now I'm just going to copy this again. And then using Replit, I'm going to create a new REPL, and I'm going to import it from GitHub. Let's see. So I'll just go ahead and copy that repository really quick. Let's see. There we go. Copy that, back to REPL, import from GitHub. And the one file that we'll need to edit once this is updated and done cloning is this site data.javascript file. And that's where we'll paste the ID from our lists of guests. So again, just copying that ID, going back to Replit, going to go to the site data. So you can see here, just an object with some values in it, going to add that guest list ID. I'll add my GitHub username, which you can get this from the URL as well. Anytime you're viewing repositories or guests on GitHub, it's usually right after github.com/username. So we'll go back over here. So I have my GitHub username. I'll rename this blog. And I'll add a little description here. A way cool blog is what I'm coming up with live on stage. That's the best we got. Okay. So yeah, once that's done, we will just click this version control, and we'll say edited site, if I can spell correctly, edited site data, and commit and push. So we've just used Replit to update this one file on this template site. That's pushing it over to, that's pushing those changes up to our version control over on GitHub. And then over on Netlify, we'll hit new site from Git. And this may ask us to do some authorization. Looks like I'm already good to go. And I'll just select that repository, hit install. Let's see here. There we go. This information should pre-fill correctly in terms of the build settings, just based on the fact that it's a Next.js site. And this is going to take a second to deploy. Again, all of the notes are in the blog post. If you have any questions or if any of that was confusing, feel free to come talk to me or connect with me. We can hop on a video call. Happy to walk through any of that if there's any trouble at all. And again, kind of built for newer developers to get something up and running and get something online. And then once this is deployed, hopefully it doesn't take too long. That's always the risk with live demos. Once that's done deploying, we'll be able to see that. But again, just to reiterate, you don't need you don't need your own website or your own blog to accomplish talking about what you've done online. A LinkedIn profile can work great. A Twitter profile can work great. Plenty of other options, plenty of other site templates. Again, the main point is, talk about what you're doing and then update it somewhat frequently. Still building. We're gonna wait. We're not going anywhere. It should take a second or two. Let's look at the build logs. That always makes it go faster. So this is, what's that?
Q&A time?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, definitely. Q&A.
So you're big on making people legit. Is there a backlash effect if you have like a personal website and it's not maintained well? It's like either broken or the last post was like 4 years ago, because I see that like constantly.
Yeah, definitely. That's the downside if it's outdated or if links are broken, that can definitely make you look bad. So probably something you're going to want to commit to. When you start, you might think about how much time you're able to put into this. If originally you start out with the idea that you're going to put in, 10 hours every week to, whatever you're doing, and then you realize, hey, that's not realistic for me. Maybe something more simple like the Paul Graham example of just, a link of, blog posts. Like something that maybe takes 15 minutes every week might be a better fit. So yeah, definitely a great question and something to consider. So if there are any other questions, happy to answer those. I think we might be good to go here. Let's see here.
So as a hiring manager, this is the sort of stuff that you stock. Have you gotten false positives or false negatives based upon these notes?
From what I've seen, generally, once you get more than a handful of data points, people posting more than a handful of times or posting projects, and if that code is open source, if I can go look in that, you can suss out pretty quick whether this is something they wrote or maybe, they got 90% of it from somebody else and then just added a few things. If you're familiar, with the technologies that you're using, it's fairly easy to tell how much effort was put in by that person. And so that's another thing to consider as you do this. The point to looking legit is you want to talk about where you are as a developer, and you want to be honest about it. And if that means that you miss out on opportunities that maybe you're not qualified for at this point in time, like that's okay. I think it's better to be honest about where you are. Usually when you get into jobs, you'll find that it's a pretty good fit, as opposed to maybe getting code from somebody else or maybe talking about things that you're not really sure about. I think you do need to balance that a little bit with imposter syndrome, though, because you might think you're not qualified something that actually, like, you're pretty close, or no, you are, like, this is something that you can do. So those are kind of things to think about. So yeah, our blog from Netlify has deployed. So we have our first blog post. So again, it uses Markdown for the blog. There's a link to mastering Markdown in the notes. But yeah, I think that whole process took, 5 or 7 minutes. And then again, just adding new posts. You can create a new GIST and then add that ID to the GIST list, right? And you have a blog, you're up and running, and it allows you to talk about what you're doing online and post frequently. So yeah, that's everything. Thank you.